For nearly a decade, Richard Callaway ruled the operations floor of Vanguard Strategies, a top-tier consulting firm nestled in the heart of Manhattan. He prided himself on running a tight ship, structured, disciplined, and free of distractions. So when a poised, confident black woman named Vanessa Brooks strode into the office on a crisp Monday morning, Richard made a critical mistake. He judged her based solely on his assumptions. In his eyes, she was just another junior hire, someone who needed to be put in her place. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes ahead of schedule, her navy blue blazer pristine, her posture upright. But Richard didn't care about punctuality. He cared about presence, about proving one's worth through sheer effort. So instead of acknowledging her early arrival, he delivered his first blow. "You're late," he said flatly, standing near the entrance, arms crossed. Vanessa, unfazed, glanced at the office clock. "Actually, my start time is at 9 o'clock, and it's only 8:50. Richard barely reacted. To him, readiness wasn't about showing up on time. It was about proving you belonged. "Showing up early doesn't mean you're prepared," he retorted. "Around here, we expect initiative." His tone was dismissive, final. It was clear he had already formed an opinion about her. Vanessa forced a polite smile. She dealt with worse. After years of working with elite firms across the country, she knew the game. If Richard thought she would cower under his scrutiny, he had another thing coming. Without another word, Richard led her through the maze of workstations, his pace brisk, his posture commanding. She noticed how he barely acknowledged the employees they passed. He was in his own world, where hierarchy reigned supreme. When they finally stopped, Vanessa realized he had placed her in a tucked-away corner, a far cry from the dynamic floor where top consultants operated. A message, loud and clear. He didn't see her as part of the core team. He dumped a heavy stack of files onto her desk. "Start with this," he ordered, his tone clipped, his gaze impassive. Vanessa exhaled slowly, suppressing the urge to challenge him. Not yet. She had already decided. She would prove herself, but not on his terms. She would do it on her own. By mid-afternoon, Richard had already made up his mind. She wasn't a good fit. His instincts were never wrong. At precisely 3 p.m., he called her into his office, prepared to cut her loose. But Vanessa sat across from him, calm, composed, her expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate ease, she slid a folder across the desk. Richard opened it, and the moment his eyes landed on the contents, his confidence shattered. His fingers stiffened on the pages. His pulse quickened. What he saw in that folder would turn his entire perception upside down. And in that moment, Richard Callaway realized he had made the worst mistake of his career. Vanessa's eyes flicked over the stack of paperwork in front of her. Expense reports, outdated contracts, and travel reimbursement forms. This wasn't her role. She was a seasoned business strategist, an expert in high-level problem-solving, not an assistant drowning in administrative tasks. But she schooled her expression into neutrality. This wasn't the moment to push back. Not yet. She took a steady breath and approached Richard's desk. "Mr. Callaway," she said evenly, keeping her tone professional. "I was hired as a consultant. Would there be tasks more relevant to my role?" Richard barely acknowledged her. "You're new. Learn to follow instructions before asking for special treatment," he replied dismissively, barely looking up. The words stung, though Vanessa didn't let it show. She had been underestimated before. People had doubted her because of her age, her race, her gender. But today, this wasn't about labels. This was about proving that she wasn't going to be overlooked. Not here, not ever. As the hours passed, Richard's behavior didn't change. Every time she attempted to collaborate with a colleague, he conveniently found a reason to interrupt. If she asked a question, his responses were clipped, almost mechanical. He was making it clear she wasn't part of his world. Even as she moved around the office, she could feel his gaze, cold and scrutinizing, watching her every move. But Vanessa didn't falter. She took each task, completed it with precision, and waited. Waited for the moment when Richard's arrogance would be his downfall. By 3 p.m., he had decided. She wasn't a fit. He called her into his office, already prepared to cut her loose. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," he said, the words coming effortlessly. "This isn't working out. You're not fitting into our company's culture. It's best we part ways." Vanessa didn't blink. She didn't argue. She simply sat there, composed, letting the silence stretch between them. Then she leaned forward just slightly. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Calloway?" she asked, her voice measured but laced with something unmistakable. Richard frowned, irritated. "What do you mean, am I sure? You've done nothing to prove yourself today." Vanessa didn't answer. She simply reached into her sleek leather bag, pulled out a folder, and placed it gently on the desk between them. Richard hesitated before opening it, and then he froze. His face drained of color as his eyes landed on the first page. There, in bold letters, was her title, Vanessa Brooks, CEO and founder of Vanguard Strategies. The next morning, an all-staff email went out. Richard Calloway was no longer with the company. His replacement? Someone who valued their employees. Someone who understood that respect wasn't given based on hierarchy, but earned through leadership. As for Vanessa Brooks, she took her rightful place at the head of the firm, determined to create a culture where no one was dismissed or disrespected for simply being who they were. The office of Vanguard Strategies was different the next morning. There was no looming presence of Richard Calloway, no condescending glances, no stifling atmosphere of control. Instead, there was a buzz in the air, a quiet shift, a collective exhale. The email had gone out at dawn. Effective immediately, Richard Calloway is no longer with the company. No further explanation was given, but none was needed. The staff had seen enough to know why. At precisely 9 a.m., Vanessa Brooks stepped into her new role, not as the newest hire, but as the one who would redefine everything. She wasn't here for revenge. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to lead. As she made her way through the office, employees exchanged quick glances, murmurs trailing in her wake. Some whispered in disbelief, others in admiration. A few of them, those who had suffered under Richard's rigid rule, sat straighter in their chairs, as if bracing for what would come next. Vanessa stopped at the center of the floor and turned to face them. "I know many of you are surprised by what happened yesterday," she said, her voice even and unwavering. "Change can be unsettling, especially when it happens so suddenly. But let me be clear, this isn't just about removing one person. It's about shifting the way this company operates." The room fell silent. No one dared to move. For too long, this firm has operated under a culture of fear and exclusion, she continued. That ends today. A few employees exchanged glances. Others leaned in curious. Vanessa took a slow breath before continuing, her eyes scanning the room. "You were hired because you're talented, because you bring something unique to this firm. No one should feel invisible here. No one should feel unheard. No one should feel like they don't belong. If we're going to succeed, we do it together." She paused, giving them time to absorb her words. "I know some of you may not trust this change yet, and that's okay," she admitted. "I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm asking for a chance to prove that this company can be better than it was yesterday. That together, we can create an environment where people thrive, not just survive." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. A few even smiled. Vanessa let the moment settle before finishing. "If you have ideas, bring them. If you see room for improvement, speak up. If you need support, you will get it. That's not a promise, it's a standard." Then, for the first time since she arrived, she smiled. "Now let's get to work." The room broke in a quiet applause. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, but genuine. And that was enough. Vanessa Brooks hadn't just taken charge. She had transformed the firm in a single day, not through power, but through purpose. And Vanguard Strategies would never be the same again.